Thank you very much for joining. Welcome to this late afternoon session, I guess. It's been a long day, but I hope it's been a good one for you all. And thanks very much for joining us. We are here to try something a little bit new, experimental, let's say. I mentioned this morning, if you were at the plenary, the fact that we're wanting to put together a Humanitarian GIS Hub that would help essentially provide the humanitarian GIS sector with a node, among many, of course, but a node to organize the various solutions and resources that we have that can help support humanitarian GIS. So I'm going to go through a quick introductory presentation now to go over those objectives. Also to pick up where we left off. This isn't actually the first time we're having this conversation. We started this, some of you may have been there, I'm not sure, about a year and a half ago. On two occasions, there was some consultation that was being carried out during the Humanitarian Network Partnership Week of 2019, which is the last, yes, 2019, and then closely after that, there was a workshop on it during the GIS for Sustainable World that was held in May 2019. And there was one workshop at the conference and then also a follow-up workshop immediately the same day or the day after at the GICHD, in fact. And so we'll pick up where we left it off there. For obvious reasons, that conversation got stalled a little bit. Yeah, then we'll present to you where we're at so far. So based on those consultations, what have we pulled together in terms of our thinking, in terms of how this hub could look, before we then break out into breakout sessions. Right now I'm seeing 15 of us total, and that's including what is it, three, four organizers, which makes 11 participants. So I'm thinking maybe two groups, maybe three. Let's see when we get closer to the time. We'll spend about 30 minutes brainstorming how we might drill down and organize these resources further before coming back to plenary, having a very quick presentation, 5-minute presentation of what was discussed during breakouts, and then an open discussion. And then let's see where we get to. We'll discuss next steps. We're just really curious to hear your reactions to the initiatives, how it should be brought forward. So the objectives, as I was mentioning earlier on today, is that, well, while we have all of these resources out there, operationalizing them is not necessarily efficient because we have a problem of discoverability and of implementation. And so we would like to organize those resources using a Humanitarian GIS Hub to facilitate this discovery, access, and implementation. And specifically the way we'd like to do that is by packaging resources up into bundles that are organized around use case types. And we'll discuss a little bit altogether about what we mean by that. But rather than, let's say, tagging a resource by sector or by response phase, trying to tag them by cross-sectoral use cases. We all, for example, no matter what sector you're in, or most sectors might require tasking of field workers for assessments. So that's the sort of use case that we want to try and define and try and organize resources around. And by resources, I mean templates and products and training material, cautionary principles. We'll get into that in a minute. As I was saying, this is not the first time we're having this conversation. So in 2019, we had a number of consultations during the Humanitarian Network Partnership Week, as well as during the Sustainable World, GIS for Sustainable World. The list of participants and organizations that participated, you can see there. So it was quite a broad range of organizations already. And through those discussions, we already managed to identify a few sort of high-level bundles, high-level themes that people had brought up as being something that they would like to see in the hub. Some things to do with drones, things to do with deployable edge device. So how can we get sort of deployable kits to areas with low bandwidth, for example. Solutions around imagery management, imagery analysis, solutions around operations management, solutions around crowdsourcing. How can we better connect and interoperate? And also linked to that, solutions around HDX. How can we really create these bridges, more efficient bridges with HDX and other data repositories and data exchange sources, for example. Besides the actual themes that were discussed, there was also already a sense of functional requirements that came out of that. So, for example, the need to design a mechanism that would allow users to navigate to those solutions via various lenses. So, for example, if you're coming in there from a donor perspective, or from a operations manager perspective, or from a GIS manager's perspective, you're going to be looking for slightly different solutions, slightly different levels of solutions, technical levels. You're going to be looking for solutions that speak more to a technical how-to, or that speak more to outcomes, for example. So that's really the role or persona lens of how you might want to be discovering those solutions. Or you might be coming in from a very sector-specific or cluster-specific lens. You want to find solutions that have been tagged to WASH and identified as specifically relevant to the WASH cluster, for example. Or from the response cycle, you're doing damage assessment. Or impact analysis, and that you're looking for solutions that are to do with that. So the question there is, how do we organize ourselves, and how do we categorize these different spectra of information, I guess. The types of resources that you want to find, or that were expressed for those bundles, were things like case studies, learning tracks, learning resources, and cautionary principles you see in there. That's quite interesting. If you were at the plenary, and Ben Parker made a very, very, very strong case about the do no harm principle around information and data security. And I think we could do very well with, whenever we're presenting a solution, to also package that up with cautionary principles, to say that there is a way of doing harm with these things, and you have to make sure that you're not doing that, right? And then also a need to provide a sort of quality management of those solutions, a sort of feedback loop or user rating system, something that really, when you see those solutions, you already get a sense from the community of its usefulness, usability, et cetera, et cetera. I was talking on the previous slide there, you were seeing these different dimensions, roles and persona, clusters, response cycle. We at that time, about a year and a half ago, we'd also listed these different types of personas here. That's not necessarily an exclusive list, but it's actually pretty comprehensive. But I'm not to say that there wouldn't be more to add here, but we'd identified enumerators, operations manager, program manager and head of office, donors, beneficiary, public, data entry clerks, data quality manager, data analyst, communications manager, and IM or GIS administrator. Certainly during the exercise and the breakout, if you can think of other personas, key personas there that we're missing, feel free to contribute those. The clusters are the clusters. So essentially, that would be one dimension of tagging for the solutions. And in terms of the cycle, the phase of our work, this is how it's organized. So we're looking at impact assessment first, which would lead to planning and prioritization, then to resource mobilization, implementation and monitoring, and evaluation. You'll notice that that cycle is the sort of the management cycle, as opposed to the disaster risk reduction cycle. We're not talking about prevention, preparedness, response, recovery. We're specifically looking at the management cycle around response. All right, so we're responding to something. What do? We do the impact assessment, we do the planning and prioritization, resource mobilization, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. And the purpose, the overall purpose of the hub would be preparedness for that response, data readiness, capacity development, and system design. So by exploring that hub, by accessing, discovering these various resources, we can better prepare ourselves for these various phases of the response cycle. So what that has led us to is to already start drafting a little bit of a structure for what this hub might look like. So the Humanitarian GIS Hub here in the middle, that would provide the sort of first level that you see there are 5 elements. A data element, which is not just linking out to data sources, but data initiatives, data standards, good practice around data. A community element, which would link you out to the various events and webinars, GeoNet, which is Esri's forum, user forum, but also to third-party hubs, so other hubs that we want to be connecting to. I mean, you imagine this hub as a node in a network of networks. An inspiration element, which is really probably more targeted at your boss's boss, right? So the managers and the executive managers in terms of what can GIS do for my organization. A response element, which would be referring people to very operational resources, the disaster response program, hubs or sites or venues for ongoing responses. What we're calling here EEGIS, or the Emergency Enterprise GIS, which is this idea of a deployable pack, a deployable server with everything pre-installed, if relevant. And then, and this is what I really want us to be discussing and thinking about today, the solutions element, which is really what the repository, an organized repository of solutions. So use case centric resources, how-tos, internal hubs and demos and products that are organized by phase, or that can be accessed by, by phase or by cluster or by persona. And that bit on the left there, that's that orange block right on the left, is really what I'm hoping we can spend a bit of time all together thinking about today, to try and identify what are these use cases. What are those use case types that we would want to bundle these resources around? All right, what are the typical business processes, call it what you want, workflows, use cases that we all commonly come across, that we could be tagging these resources to? Okay. I'm going to stop in a minute, and I want to open up for a first set of reactions before we break out. But before that, I just wanted to provide a bit of an overview of how we're going to do that. This is a sort of a simplified version of a sort of a classic use case definition sheet. Some of you might have worked with these things before, where you're basically defining the use case. So you've got a title, you've got the name of the use case, and then you're trying to formulate it as a sentence. You sort of put yourself in the shoes of a particular persona, and you tell yourself, well, as that person, in order to do something, I want to do this, 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 and that. And the this, and that is the use case. And we then detail that down by, okay, what are the information sources and data inputs that need to go into that? What are you actually doing? What are your actions? And what are you spitting out? And if you're able to fill out a sheet like that, you've actually got a pretty good description and a pretty good starting point of how you might start to design a system or a subsystem that would support that. Just to give you a quick concrete example of how that might look. Let's say I talked about tasking, and tasking is a pretty common thing that say operations managers need to do. So we'll call this this use case allocating a damage assessment task to field personnel. So that would be our use case. And so you'd say that, yeah, okay, as an operations manager, in order to assess overall damage in my location, I want to assign my field staff to zones on a map. So that's kind of how you would articulate your requirement here in a sentence. And if you want to, and then by drilling down into the details of that, the information sources that we're going to need for that are, well, the location of potential affected areas, distribution of vulnerable populations, field staff availability, completed assessments, what areas have already been done so that you don't go and task staff to areas that have already been covered, and contextual spatial data, road blockages, for example, security incidents. What are we going to do with that? Well, the ops manager is going to visualize the distribution of potentially affected areas and population vulnerability. The ops manager will select an affected area by clicking on a map, then assign that area to available staff by selecting staff in a drop-down list, and field staff will receive that task assignment notification. And what it'll spit out, what this particular workflow spits out, is a map of assessment tasks symbolized by status. So whether it's pending, assigned, or complete, as well as task description and location for the field staff. So we're going to recreate that in our breakout rooms. And so the moderator, so my colleagues and I completely failed to do the introductions there, and I'll do that in a minute and let them introduce themselves. We'll lead those discussions with you. We'll have 2 or 3 rooms. I don't exactly know how many people we now have. But we will run through this form, which essentially recreates the slide that I just showed you. So we'll be adding a name in there. You pick the persona that you want to be either defining or describing your use case for. This is the objective of the use case. So this is the high level objective. So reporting on the distribution and progress of a program, for example. And then what is it specifically that you want to do in this use case? The list of events and actions, and then, if relevant, is this relevant to a specific phase? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just generally relevant, or maybe you want us to allocate to a specific phase. And is it relevant to a specific cluster? Again, maybe it's not cluster specific, but it allows us to then start making a start with the tagging. I'm going to stop there until before we move into the breakout rooms. I do want to, and apologies again to Katja and Brendan, and has Rami joined us? I can't actually see the full list of people here. I'm going to stop sharing 2 seconds. I
don't think he's joined.
No, okay. Katja and Brendan, do you want to introduce yourselves? And then what I'd like to do is maybe open it up for a few reactions and thoughts and questions before we break out. Katja?
Sure. Hello everyone. So I'm Katja. I'm based in Nyon in Switzerland, and I'm working on the non-profit program on behalf of Esri Switzerland and Germany. So I'm happy to be in the team of my colleagues from Esri Inc. Today for this conference.
And I'm Brendan O'Neill. I'm an account manager on Esri's nonprofit and global organizations team. I'm based in the Netherlands, and I work mostly with UN agencies, international nonprofits in Europe. Some of you I recognize on the call, and others are new faces. Looking forward to meeting you.
Thanks very much. And our moderator, Roxana, would you like to also introduce yourself? You're helping out with the breakout rooms.
Yes. Hi, I'm Roxana from CartONG, and I'm making sure everything is going fine for this workshop. So
great. So Roxana, I don't know, were you able to generate breakout rooms already? Were you able to figure out the process for that?
Yes, so I can do it automatically because it's much quickly, and then manually assign each of you in.
Excellent.
We do 3.
Yeah, what do you think, Katya and Brendan? There's a fair amount of people there.
Yeah,
I think 3 would be good.
I think 3 is good. And yeah.
And then we can, I hesitate to have a round of introductions now at plenary because we are a bit tight on time, but we can probably do that within our breakout rooms.
Yeah.
But what I would like to do before we do the breakouts is just provide anybody with a chance to react to what you've seen so far, ask any questions on the process, any thoughts. Would anybody like to jump in? Just get off mute and speak. There's no particular process for that.
Hi, Olivier. This is Travis in Berlin, Germany. I did join a little late, so I apologize if my question is off. You already answered it, but I had 2. One is there a hub out there, in any realm that you see as a model for this? Not necessarily to do with GIS, just as a hub, sure. Basis. And then the second one was in terms of the link to other Esri collateral and Esri hubs, or places to go for collateral, how that fits.
Sorry, the second part of your question, can you clarify that? I didn't really catch what you meant there.
Well, like I worked for almost 20 years at Motorola, and I did a humanitarian hub, for communication solutions. And we always brought it back to, the same content as the Motorola solutions.com page. So I'm just wondering how you want to go back, how much you want to do that, or is it something really standalone?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. All right. First question on terms of are there other hubs out there? In the humanitarian sector, there are plenty of hubs. They tend to be a lot more focused on, say, data or maps. So there are hubs out there that will be specific to a particular theme. I personally haven't seen yet a hub that tries, I guess, structured the way I just showed. Please, I'd love to hear of some if people have examples that we can inspire ourselves from. I think that would be fantastic. Having said that, the sort of thing I have in mind is say booking.com, or these websites where you're buying something and you filter it by specific by filters, right? And as you filter, you get a smaller and smaller list of solutions that are relevant to that filtered requirement. And so that is the sort of thing that, at least from the solutions end, we would maybe like to try and get to, where you're really kind of only being presented with those solutions that are most closely relevant to the use case that you've come in with, to try and avoid being a little bit submerged by the sort of universe of GIS solutions that are out there, which can be, and I know from user experience, quite off-putting or overwhelming, right? So that's really the idea. And I would love to hear of hubs that might go in that direction. Regarding the link to Esri, to the Esri website, this will sit within the Esri website environment. This will be a node that will be presenting Esri solutions from the product's point of view, of course, but that would be linking out to other initiatives, relevant initiatives, third-party initiatives, according to the theme that you're looking at, right? So this is what I meant by this is the Esri's node among however many other nodes are out there that we want to be contributing to the sector. Yeah.
Wait, to just add, Olivier, I think going through this process, I think we understand, even as people working at Esri, there are so many resources that we're producing that could be valuable to this community that we actually have a hard time even getting our heads around, because there is so much of it. So in some ways, it's an attempt to organize that content and present it in a more accessible way.
Great. Okay. Are there any other questions? I'm seeing a couple questions come in on the chat, including one for a recap of the last couple slides from Saiti Brenda. recursor those slides from the second last, which is probably not a bad thing anyway, because that was introducing essentially what we're going to do. So let me just go back to that slide and share my screen with you on this before we then break out. Roxana, were you able to create the breakout rooms? I forgot. I've asked you that.
Well, I'll create them after you.
Okay. So let me just go back to this slide here. So I don't know exactly how far back you wanted me, but this is the hub structure. And what we were saying was that we would like to run through now in the exercise that we're going to break out into to try and define use cases. So you're going to be defining a title and a name for that use case, filling in this sentence, and your respective moderators will be able to guide you through that, and filling in the information, the relevant information. There was one point that I kind of skipped over. For example, in this objectives point here, so in order to assess overall damage, as an operations manager, I might want to be assigning my field staff to zones on a map. It doesn't stop me from defining the same objectives from the point of view of the field officer who wants to do something else. The field officer is going to want to collect the field observations on the geo-enabled tool. So this was just to show that, you know, you can have the same objectives but different use cases pointing towards the same objectives. So a little bit to distinguish between what we call the objective and the actual thing that you do, which is the use case. Fine then, shall we go ahead and break out, unless there are.
One of the things that came up in our session at the end was whether we can share the form for people to add more. So I shared it in the chat right now. If people want to, feel free to distribute the link to any of your other colleagues in the sector who want to contribute to the project. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Great. Yeah, we actually went ahead and did it exactly like that. And in fact, some of the group filled in directly in the form. And yeah, this is not going to be closed for immediately. So yeah, in your own time, if you have other ideas that you'd like to suggest, that'd be fantastic. Yeah. So how should we do this? Do we want to have each group give a quick 5-minute on how it went, and then we can have a bit more of a broad discussion on process. Would that work? Can I?
Sure.
Sure. Do you want to go ahead, Brendan?
Yeah, sure. We probably should have done the approach where we each kind of went out and filled the form, but I enjoyed the conversation that we had. We only got through one use case, but I thought it was a really useful process. We were basically going over, I forget the exact title, but it was defining new health boundaries for a area of interest. And the problem is really around, working with governments who maybe don't have existing health boundaries. And they're, from what I understand from participants, it's important to share them out, or to have well-defined health boundaries so that the communities where you're working in understand where different health services are located. So that's what we're trying to achieve is communicate the accurate locations of different health services that were there. But sometimes that data does not exist, or the data that does exist is incorrect. So we really wanted to be able to get feedback from the community, as well as other stakeholders, other counterparts that are working in the area, to validate or provide feedback on improvements that can be made, and ultimately, take those suggestions and improve the data to be shared out. And I think one of the interesting things that we realized was that use case actually filters into a lot of different sections on the response cycle, because it is kind of a foundational data layer that feeds into a number of different sections or processes around the wheel, and also a number of different clusters too. So health, obviously, but then nutrition, shelter, protection, etc. So yeah, that was our experience. I think we probably could have done a few more, but yeah, we did a bit of a deep dive, and it was great. I don't know if anyone else from our team wanted to add to that, either on that use case or the process. I'm not gonna volunteer Stella again, as I did on the call before in the breakout group.
Great, thanks a lot. Katja, do you want to go ahead with your group?
Yeah. So yeah, it was a nice discussion. The time ran out very fast, so we're short of time to finish our second submission. But yeah, there was a few ideas that were raised. Sven shared a few use cases that he had thought of. So one was about being able to have a tool to help count tents automatically from satellite imagery over refugee camps. So that's about AI. It's about yeah, documentation, how to, but any tool that would facilitate this standard workflow would be very helpful. Lots among the different ideas we discussed, what comes out is that people are not necessarily looking for new tools, because there's so many tools out there and there's so many resources and data and everything, but they're really looking for guidelines, documentation on best practices, how to. There's another case that was discussed. We didn't fill it in, but it was about hurricanes or natural disasters. When a hurricane is coming and they receive the path of this hurricane as a shapefile or as a feature service or anything, and they overlap it with the population data in a raster format, how to easily calculate the population that will be impacted. So this is also more about the workflow, the documentation, what tool is best to do that, to achieve this analysis, and what data to use. That was the second case. And the third one that was discussed was about flood risk assessments at a micro level, so at the level of the settlements. Again, to optimize the refugee camp locations, how to easily calculate the flood-prone areas based again on geology data, terrain data, DEMs, and so on. And this again is need really for improved or documentation on how to best achieve these analyses, and what tools and what resources are available to do that, or maybe a simplified process to carry out these analyses.
Thank you very much. Just a quick response to the comment by Sven that you reported there, Sven, on absolutely the objective here is, on the contrary, is certainly not to be generating new products and solutions here, but to organize the existing ones, right? To organize them in a way that we can actually operationalize. So that's absolutely the objective of this. And now I'm just looking at the data that has come in by submitting that, and we're already seeing there's already some interesting things coming out here. Just really quickly on our group, we went through a few. So let me just see which ones it was. The first one was Ivan with your. Let me just find it again. That one there, right? So it was a site management, essentially, site evaluation tool. So looking at a workflow around evaluating the planning of an extension to a site. Johnny, we talked about. Can you remind me? Sorry, Johnny, which one was yours now?
Mapping people in need is kind of similar to the last example.
Wasn't it? So there was a mapping of people in need, indeed, and then we also talked about epidemic forecasting and described those. So what you're looking at here is actually already the accumulation of these various use cases that were defined. And what I'm finding quite interesting, and I was kind of hoping that this might be the case, that the process of just running through it in itself helps to identify how it should be done, as opposed to the other way around. Because what I'm finding the most useful column here, I don't know what you think, is this in order to. It's really that objective level, which I'm thinking can become quite a useful way of organizing our different use cases. Because of course, specific use cases are going to be very specific to a particular organization, a particular event. But they, if you go up one level to the objective of that use case, what is that overall objective of the use case? You know, is it to communicate to the community? Is it to define risk? Is it to provide a centralized source of information, to track the spread, to track spread? That level of, I think that level of speak starts to become quite useful in our organization. So that's already been very helpful just for me to get my head around. We've got about 15 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is maybe open it up now for any reaction on the process, any thoughts on, hopefully the overall objective is relatively clear now. Are there any thoughts on how you would see this? How would you go about pushing this forward? What do you think we should see as the next steps here?
I think I have an input on this. So for instance, in the support we are providing for MSF, right now we are focusing on population data sets. There has been a lot of discussions around this topic this year because also of the COVID. And yeah, the main question was, there are a lot of population data sources. What is the best data source in order to respond to my needs? And we are working now on an internal study or approach, I could say, in order to make an inventory of the different population data sets and different platforms that are already existing. Understanding the methodologies that have been used to generate those population data sets. And basically the output of this is to have like a decision tree that will guide you from getting closer and closer to the best population data set for your work. For instance, I want to have a population on gender or on different group of ages, or I want to have population at the regional level or at a national level, stuff, things like this. And the idea is that the epidemiologists or the GIS specialists that have to make quickly a decision in an emergency situation, they have this decision tree in order to follow through. And I was thinking, as Kata mentioned, and Esri has a lot of apps already existing and products. So I think having these use cases as decision tree will help, yes, you know, have at the end a clear image on what is the app that I need or the final product.
Yeah, thanks. This sort of decision tree model is exactly what we're trying to get at here with this, defining these different dimensions: use case, phase, cluster, persona, to try and I don't know if anybody was involved in the Nomad project, which by the way will feature, I think, in the Failfest, but I think that the concept was similar and valid. It failed for other reasons, in my opinion, but this decision tree approach to narrowing down on a relevant solution is really where we want to get to. And it applies to solutions, but it applies to data, absolutely. And so in that data section of the hub, of our hub, but of any other hub, you can actually imagine the same process where you would be filtering down by all of these different dimensions of information. Yeah. Thanks.
I have a question to Roxanne actually. About this data that you just explained, is it only for MSF or it will be open for all humanitarian organizations?
This output of this decision tree?
Yes.
It will. We plan to share it on the MSF portal.
Okay.
And I know there are some some tabs that are in open access. So we haven't defined yet.
Yeah,
but,
okay. Because UNHCR can benefit from that as well, because
yeah.
we look for many times for people of, population and people of concern. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can
okay.
discuss further by CartONG, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the feedback.
Typically, the sort of data initiative that I would love our hub to point to as well. So if somebody happens to be coming through our hub and go to the data section, then within that, all those initiatives that help with data selection, such as the one you just mentioned there, would be something that we would want to be able to refer to. Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks, Roxana. Are there any thoughts, any questions, any ideas for next steps?
I have a question. Are you looking at doing integrations with the data sets that you're talking about, or is it just to point to in the right direction?
So can you repeat that? I was actually looking for who was speaking, and I just realized it was usually Lizzie. Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, it's Lizzie. I'm trying to not distract with my busy animals. I was curious if you're doing an integration model with the other data sets that you're going to point people towards, or if it's just to give them a roadmap and a application to go to.
A bit of a mix. I mean, I think when there are, for example, initiatives like Roxana's that are basically standalone initiatives, we would just be referring to that, I think. We are looking, for example, at bridging Esri's Living Atlas to HDX, for example. So that sort of integration will happen where we see that there is, again, a use case, a usefulness to it. So if you go to the data section, you'd be presented with standalone initiatives. You'd also be presented with our own data holdings, and then also with solutions for bridging between the two. So it's a bit of a mix. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mary, you've gone on mute.
I have indeed.
Yes.
Any thoughts on providing services for handling some of the issues of data conversion, projections, and all that kind of stuff to somewhere central for everyone to be able to go to? Because not everyone has the tools that some of us have.
I agree. That's it. Let me take note and make sure that I capture that. And then we just need to figure out where it fits best. I mean, it'll fit in a few places there, because it could actually be a solution. And what you just described is a use case. It's a use case for a GIS manager who wants to convert data, project data, right? So that would be a solution that we would find in that solutions part of the. Let me just share the visual again, just so that we're talking about that. So you can imagine it in that solutions part, but you can imagine it as a channel in some of the discussion communities. So yes, let me capture that, because that is a use case in itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any other questions? We're about 10 minutes. We don't have to use the full time. Don't want us to hang around for nothing. But if there are any other questions or comments, yeah, Johnny.
I touched on it in our chat, just on the roles and personas that you've identified already. I just wondering, are these the target users, or are this just what you're considering at this stage? Just because the site that is made for the public would be very different to one that is for a GIS analyst, for example, and it's quite hard to make something that meets everybody's needs.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good question. So first of all, that list, as I was telling you in our breakout, that's not comprehensive necessary, right? So we can always be adding to that and changing. What I would like to see eventually is that the users, it is a multiple, it's a broad range of users, and it wouldn't just be data analysts or GIS analysts actually. So if you come in there from a management perspective, from the manager's point of view, you would already be, the solutions that are presented to you would be pre-filtered to those that are touching on much more on outcomes and business case and inspirational stories and what it has, what those solutions can do for your organization at a sort of programmatic, sort of strategic level. So I think it is possible that if I come in here and search by persona, and that my persona happens to be a GIS program manager, that this then filters out solutions that are going to be speaking to me as a manager. There's actually a really nice example. I'm not going to try and dig it up now because I'm going to waste your time looking through my bookmarks, but there's a really nice example of where the first level of filtering is by called experience cards, and depending on what you click, an experienced GIS officer or a manager or something else, you're presented with a slightly different environment. And so
I'll just add that it's not a direct correlation, but I would say, and I think this is also in response to the question around is there a good example out there? That came up earlier. The work that we did for the coordinated coronavirus response from our disaster response program, I think it's not exactly what we're trying to do here, but I think it's a good example of a hub that speaks to a number of different audiences, right? So there might be some people that are just trying to retrieve the latest information. There might be people who are more operational in health departments at the national level, at the local level. They might be private sector employees, but they're able to get access to solutions, to templates, configurations of our software, as well as get access to other applications, whether they're dashboards or other things that are maybe have a geographic focus, specific countries or otherwise. And then there's also resources there for just getting access to data. And that data is varied, right? It could be cases, it could be closures for borders and things like that, travel restrictions. So we can dig that up and share that out. But I think it's a good example of kind of having, well, it's kind of grown. So I think we want to have a little bit more of a focused experience, but it is an example of a single point speaking to multiple audiences and hopefully guiding them to the sections of the hub that would be most relevant for them so that they can get access to either the information, the data, or the solutions that they need.
All right, any other, Roxana?
Yes. Sorry, I don't know if you already mentioned at the beginning. First thing, two things I want to highlight. If you think, if you are taking into consideration the fact that there are humanitarian organizations that are Esri users, some that are hybrid, I could say, like both open source and Esri, and some that, and maybe especially the small one, that they are not Esri users. So I think, yeah, this is a question. And the second question, I don't know if you mentioned about timeline or follow-up on this implementation.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, very good point. Right. So in terms of timeline, we're going to continue doing various consultations. Probably the next form that will take will be a survey that we're going to be distributing. For this, we'll learn a little bit from this workshop and see how we adjust the questions that we put to people. I certainly learned from today usefulness of the objectives part here for I think the right level of categorization of use cases. And so I think we'll probably aim towards something like that. So over the next couple months, we will in parallel continue drawing input, and at the same time we're going to start building out the hub. For those of you, if you saw the demo, it's a configurable thing. So it's not as if it's we can do this in a very sort of agile way in a sense, because we can just put one out there, play around with it, adjust it, etc. The sort of timeline I've given myself is around February, because with Sven we were discussing that this could be around the time of a GIS subgroup, the Global Information Management Working Group GIS subgroup meeting, where I could already present a first prototype. And so have that as a bit of a stepping stone, or a bit of a milestone rather, sorry, to have something out there. And then from there on, really open it up to feedback. We're going to need to start populating it, of course. And what I would love what I could imagine is that the hub, we could also start using the hub from Esri's perspective to identify themes and thematics for webinars, so that we're actually speaking to a specific thing that we see on the hub and really focus on that, and then populate the hub based on the webinar and those discussions, and sort of really try to foster discussions around specific themes that you can then find in the hub. So that's the idea. Then it really becomes a bit of a living entity, I guess, that we're constantly working on, but that actually becomes a sort of anchor for these discussions. So that's broadly what we're looking at here. But I would expect that we would have a hub that people are able to use usefully within the first half of 2021. Well, thank you very much for coming to a couple of minutes to schedule here. If there are no more questions, thanks so much for your input, and keep, like we said, you keep that form with you. If you think of a use case and you want to, and it, even for yourself, it helps to sort of structure your thinking around it. Don't hesitate to just drop it in, and we'll be seeing that data coming in, and it'll continue informing how we organize ourselves. So keep that link. And drop us ideas of use cases anytime you like. Thanks very much. Thanks, Roxana, for the moderation, and yeah, we'll see you in the rest of the event. Bye.
Okay. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.